in this book you'll have a lot of chapters. One of them is on paper. I bring this to people's awareness because it was probably the most startling statistic I found. It takes 2.5 gallons of water to create one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And if you're not aware of the water problems that are also escalating, it's time you start to. One of the things I feel is important is that we go from green IT to sustainable IT, and in that start to get a broader view. Because sustainability is all about the integration of systems. So if we don't see the electricity, what's behind the electricity, how the electricity is created, the fuel that's needed to use and get the water to create the paper, we're kind of out there. We're not looking at the sources and how we're actually getting things unless you've done deep dives into the supply chain and you understand how these things are sourced. We're in major resource contention. 7 billion people on the planet need food, water, clean air, a few other things. And there's some of these things actually have finite. Energy is finite. We think about renewables, we haven't really tapped them all that well. But to create some of the things we need, like solar panels, we need elements, compounds that are not in plentiful supply. So when we start to think about IT, I really want you to think about extending the entire life cycle. So the most energy that's actually consumed in the life of a device happens at its manufacturer. So when we think about energy conservation, that means, in my opinion, extending the life of that device. Now, there's that question about how efficient is it and when do I replace it? I'm not saying that if you have a good argument for a more efficient device that you shouldn't upgrade. I'm saying take that device that you've taken out of service and put it to another use, either internally or externally. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but most IT that's gotten rid of by US corporations has another 3 or 4 years of usable life in it. And there are lots of different things you can do with it besides recycle it. Now, there's another reason to be careful of those IT devices. There are 3 categories of materials that you may or may not be aware of. The first I'm talking about is conflict minerals. These come out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they're called conflict minerals because the society is based on murder and rape. And so there are actually laws on the book that are calling for transparency. Those laws haven't been enforced, but the supply chain is becoming much more rigorous about demanding transparency for the sourcing of these particular compounds. So to make sure that these compounds aren't coming from this area and supporting this particular society means that those elements have to be sourced somewhere else. That puts a higher demand. Now, that's one. There's this other thing called rare earth elements. They're the things that make your phone vibrate. They're critical to most of our electronics, from medical equipment to the devices we use every day. They aren't exactly rare, they're plentiful on the earth, but they're very, very difficult to mine, very dirty to mine, costly from a labor and environmental perspective. The US abandoned mining these for those reasons, and right now, most, if not all, the rare earth elements are coming from China. As you may well have noticed, China, India have their own emerging markets. The demand for these elements may well be enough to meet the current yield in these markets without ever exporting. And China has shown its propensity to play strong arm around these elements. They had a stranglehold on Japan for a while. They're continually in the news about what's going on and can we get them. When I was at the EPA a couple months ago and talking to folks there, they said, yes, indeed, we're very concerned because we need these elements to continue the electronic production. And if we don't start to curb our use it and throw it away kind of appetite, you know, we're accelerating this kind of crisis if we don't start to make use of what we've got and keep that just a little bit longer. Do you need an iPad 3 if you already have an iPad 2? And then there are the toxic compounds. Do you know the one that I think it was Tom Lehrer did, beryllium, you know, to the tune of a modern major general? Well, this is what's in much of your electronics today. And how they are handled at the end of life is really critical. Now, last July, the National Strategy for Electronic Stewardship was announced from the EPA, and just a few weeks ago, the GSA has mandated that US government agencies will use a certified recycler. And that's to address this issue explicitly and what's happening now. If they go into a landfill, they poison the water and the soil. If they're incinerated, they gas out toxic gases. And this is what's happening. So we can only account for less than 20% of the e-waste in the US. That's in 2009. That's a lot of stuff that's being incinerated. And of that, 17.7%, upwards of 50%, most people think closer to 80%, was exported. Now, there's a statute called the Basel Convention that was adopted by 169 countries. Notably, not signing the Basel Convention were Afghanistan, Haiti, and the United States. I'm just going to shift. I want you to see where it's going. I'll have to come back here a minute. This is where it's going. It's going to Nigeria, Ghana, other parts of Africa, Nigeria. Guiyu, China is one of the most toxic places on the planet, the highest miscarriage rate on the planet. You may have seen the 60 Minutes expose or the Frontline expose, that many of the things that we think are going to the right place end up here. Contrary to public opinion, it's getting worse, not better. Partly because we're just consuming electronics faster and faster, and there's still a demand. So people are burning these electronics to get at the precious metals at the cost of human life.